100. Hold that number in your mind for a moment because it is going to do something to you before this teaching is over. 100 distinct things, teachings, corrections, invitations, warnings, promises, reversals, riddles, and revelations that came out of the mouth of a single man walking the dusty roads of a small and occupied province at the far edge of the Roman Empire. 100 separate doorways, each one opening onto a different room in the vast house of what it means to be alive, to be human, to be known by God, and to know Him in return. And yet, if you were raised in a church, or if you absorbed your sense of Jesus from the culture around you, from a handful of holidays and a few familiar verses stitched onto greeting cards and stained glass windows, the odds are overwhelming that you were handed only 10 of them, maybe fewer. 10 teachings, worn smooth by repetition, polished down to their most comfortable and least demanding shape, and presented to you as though they were the whole of what He said. They were not the whole. They were the doorstep. And the reason so many people who genuinely love Jesus still feel, somewhere beneath the surface of their faith, a quiet and persistent sense that something is missing, a sense that there must be more to this than what they have been given, is that they are standing on the doorstep and have been told it is the entire house. They have circled the same 10 verses for years, decades, a lifetime, and they have wondered, in their more honest moments, why a faith built on the very words of the living God should ever feel thin, should ever feel repetitive, should ever leave them hungry. It is not because the words are thin. It is because they were only ever given the smallest fraction of them. I want to take you inside the house today. Not all 100 rooms, because a single teaching could not hold them, and a single lifetime could barely explore them, but far, far more than the 10 you were given. I want to show you the teachings that got left out. The ones that were too strange, too demanding, too uncomfortable, too politically inconvenient, too economically threatening, or simply too easy to overlook when the goal was to produce a tidy and manageable version of a man who was never tidy and was never, ever manageable. I want to show you the Jesus who said things that would still get a person thrown out of most respectable gatherings today. The Jesus whose teachings, taken in their fullness, do not comfort the comfortable and leave them undisturbed, but reach into the deepest architecture of a human life and begin gently and relentlessly to rebuild it from the foundation up. Because here is the truth that this entire teaching rests upon, and I want to say it plainly before we go one step further. The reason you were only told about 10 is not primarily that anyone was hiding the other 90 from you out of malice. It is that the other 90 cost something. They cost the hearer something, and a message that costs the hearer something is always, in every generation, quietly sanded down into a message that costs nothing, because the version that costs nothing is easier to spread, easier to sell, easier to build institutions around, and easier to live with on a Tuesday afternoon when you would rather not be disturbed. The full teaching of Jesus is not difficult, because God is harsh. It is difficult because love, when it is real, always asks everything, and most of what got left out of the version you were handed was left out precisely because it asked too much. Think about how this happens, because it does not happen through conspiracy. It happens through comfort. A teaching arrives that is demanding, that unsettles, that asks the hearer to change at the root. And the human heart, which is endlessly resourceful in its own defense, does not reject the teaching outright, because to reject the words of Jesus openly would be too obviously a betrayal. Instead, it does something far more subtle. It keeps the teaching but drains it. It keeps the words but softens their edge. It keeps the sentence but removes the part that would cut. And so, generation after generation, the sharpest sayings of Jesus are passed down in a form that has been quietly rounded off, until what remains is a version safe enough to embroider on a cushion and weak enough to leave the embroiderer exactly as they were. This is how you end up with 10 teachings that ask nothing and 90 that were never mentioned. So this is your invitation to receive the fuller portion, to have set before you, over the length of this teaching, the words of Jesus that rarely make it onto the felt boards of Sunday school or into the 3-point sermons that end precisely on time. Some of them will comfort you more deeply than anything you have ever heard. Some of them will unsettle you in ways you did not expect and may not immediately welcome. All of them are His, and all of them were meant for you. Not the sanitized, reduced, made manageable you that the world keeps trying to produce, but the real you, the one with the real fears and the real longings and the real capacity for a life immeasurably larger than the one you have settled for. Before we go any further, I want to pause and speak to you directly, the specific person hearing these words right now. I want to invite you into something. This channel has a membership, and I want to tell you about it not as a transaction, but as an open door into a smaller room within this larger one. When you become a member, you step into a circle of people walking this same road. People who are hungry for the fuller portion, who are tired of the doorstep and want to see the whole house. Members receive teachings made only for them, and they see each new video before anyone else does. It is a way of belonging more deeply to what we are building here together. And I want to say this as clearly and as gently as I know how. There is no pressure at all. If you are in a season where you cannot give anything to help support this work, that is completely all right. Truly, simply being here, giving your time and your attention to these words already makes you one of us. You already belong. But if you are able, and if you want to step further in, joining is simple. Tap the join button just beneath this video, choose whichever tier feels right to you, and you are in. That is all it takes. And while you are there, I would love it if you would leave a comment and tell me one thing you are struggling to trust God with right now. Honestly, without performance, without dressing it up. Just the real thing. You would be amazed how much it means to see those words appear, and how many people scrolling past will find in your honesty the permission to be honest themselves. Now, let us open the house. We begin where the sanitized version almost never begins, not with comfort, but with the teaching Jesus Himself chose to place first, the one so foundational that everything else is built upon it, and yet so frequently skipped that many believers have never once heard it explained. The first thing that got left out. The kingdom is not where you think it is. When Jesus began to preach, His opening announcement was not, "God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life," though something like that is true in its proper place. His opening announcement was that the kingdom of God had come near. And almost immediately, He began to describe this kingdom in ways that baffled everyone who heard Him, because it did not look like any kingdom anyone had ever seen or imagined. Every person listening to Jesus had a mental picture of what a kingdom was. A kingdom was Rome, with its legions and its roads and its eagles and its emperor who called himself the son of a god. A kingdom was the memory of David and Solomon, of a throne in Jerusalem and armies in the field and the wealth of nations flowing into the treasury. A kingdom was power you could see, territory you could map, an army you could count, a king you could point to. And into that expectation, Jesus spoke words that must have sounded at first like a kind of madness. The kingdom of God, He said, is like a mustard seed, the smallest of seeds, so small you could lose it in the crease of your palm, which a man plants, and which grows into something larger than anyone would have predicted from so unpromising a beginning. The kingdom of God, He said, is like yeast that a woman hides in a large quantity of flour, working invisibly, silently, from the inside out, until the whole batch is transformed. The kingdom of God, He said, does not come with observation. You cannot say, "Look, here it is," or "there it is," because, and here is the phrase that got left out of so many tellings, the kingdom of God is within you, or among you. in your midst. Right here, in the space between the people who are listening, in the very fabric of the ordinary moment you are living in right now. Do you feel how strange that is? How completely it overturns the assumption that God's reign is something distant, something institutional, something located primarily in grand buildings and official structures and the visible machinery of religion. Jesus located the kingdom in the last place anyone was looking, in the small, the hidden, the interior, the overlooked. He said it grows the way a seed grows, which is to say, slowly, invisibly underground, in a manner that offers you almost nothing to photograph and almost nothing to boast about. He said it spreads the way yeast spreads, which is to say, quietly, thoroughly, transformingly, without fanfare and without announcement, changing the whole substance of a thing from within, rather than conquering it from without. This teaching got left out, or reduced to a single memorized verse stripped of its scandal, because it refuses to give us the kingdom we want. We want a kingdom we can see and measure and control. We want a kingdom with a scoreboard so that we can know whether we are winning. We want a God whose reign is obvious, whose power is visible, whose victories can be counted and displayed. And Jesus, patiently and repeatedly, keeps pointing us toward a kingdom that is almost embarrassingly humble in its outward form. A kingdom that begins in the size of a mustard seed. A kingdom that works like yeast worked into dough by the hands of a woman in an ordinary kitchen. A kingdom you will miss entirely if you are only looking for the grand and the impressive, because it is happening in the small and the hidden, and it is happening, he insists, right where you are. And this matters enormously for the anxious, exhausted, striving heart. Because if the kingdom of God comes in visible power, then your job is to build it, to force it, to make it happen through the strength of your effort and the impressiveness of your results. But if the kingdom of God comes like a seed and works like yeast, then your job is something else entirely. Your job is to receive it, to make room for it, to let it be planted in you and worked into you, and then to trust the slow and hidden process by which God grows what God has planted. You are not the architect of the kingdom, you are the soil. And there is an enormous rest available in that reframing, a rest that the visible, measurable, scoreboard version of religion can never give you, because the visible version will always leave you anxiously checking the score. Consider what this would mean if you truly believed it. So much of the exhaustion that settles into a person of faith comes from the unspoken conviction that the kingdom depends on them. That if they do not strive hard enough, build fast enough, produce impressively enough, then God's purposes will falter, and it will be their fault. This is a crushing weight, and it is not from God. The mustard seed does not strain to become a tree. The yeast does not agonize about whether it is working. The seed is planted and it grows, because that is what seeds do when they are placed in the ground. Your task is to be good ground, to receive the seed, to make room, and then to trust the mysterious and patient power of God to accomplish what only God can accomplish. The kingdom is not a burden laid on your shoulders. It is a life planted in your soil. And the difference between those two pictures is the difference between a faith that exhausts you and a faith that grows you. The teaching about anxiety that goes far deeper than "don't worry." You have probably heard at some point that Jesus said not to worry. It is one of the 10. It gets quoted often, usually in a tone that can come across as mildly scolding, as though anxiety was simply a failure of willpower that you could correct if you would only try a little harder to relax. But the teaching Jesus actually gave about anxiety is nothing like a scolding, and it goes so much deeper than "don't worry" that to reduce it to those two words is almost to lose it entirely. Look at how he actually approached it. He did not begin by commanding people to stop feeling anxious, which would be about as useful as commanding a drowning person to stop feeling like they are drowning. He began by directing their attention outward and upward, to the birds of the air. Consider them, he said, they do not sow or reap or gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. He pointed to the wildflowers scattered across the Galilean hillsides, the lilies of the field, which do not labor or spin, and yet he said, not even Solomon in all his glory was clothed like one of these. And then he asked the question that reframes the entire experience of anxiety. Are you not of more value than they? If God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and thrown into the oven tomorrow, will he not much more clothe you? Notice what he is actually doing here, because it is far more sophisticated than a simple command to calm down. He is diagnosing anxiety at its root, and the root he identifies is not a lack of willpower. It is a lack of trust in the character of God. Anxiety, in the teaching of Jesus, is fundamentally a theological condition before it is an emotional one. It grows in the gap between what we believe about God's power and what we believe about God's care. Many people believe that God is powerful, that he could help if he wanted to, while secretly doubting that he is good, that he actually sees them, that he is genuinely attentive to the small and specific details of their particular life. And it is precisely in that gap between believing in God's power and doubting God's care that anxiety makes its home and builds its nest and settles in for the long winter of a restless life. So Jesus does not attack the symptom. He goes for the root. He piles up evidence for the care of God, the fed birds, the clothed flowers, the counted hairs of your head, the Father who knows what you need before you ask him, until the accumulated weight of that evidence begins to close the gap. He is not saying your problems are not real. He is not saying the future holds nothing to fear. He is saying that the God who attends so lavishly to the sparrow, who dresses the wild grass in a splendor that outshines the wealthiest king who ever lived, has not overlooked you, has not forgotten you, has not left you to fend for yourself in an indifferent universe. And when that truth goes all the way down, not as a slogan you repeat, but as a reality you actually inhabit, the ground in which anxiety grows begins, slowly, to lose its capacity to sustain it. And then he adds the line that is the actual command, and it is not, "Don't worry." It is this: "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." Do you see the reorientation? He does not tell you to stop thinking about your needs by sheer force of will. He tells you to give your primary attention, your first and deepest seeking, to something larger than your needs, to the kingdom, to the reign and the will and the presence of God. And he promises that in the pursuit of that larger thing, the smaller things you were so anxious about will be taken care of. Anxiety shrinks not when you attack it directly, but when you become absorbed in something greater than the objects of your fear. This is one of the most practically powerful teachings in all of human history on the subject of the anxious mind, and it has been reduced, in the version many of us received, to a mild and slightly annoying "don't worry." The full teaching is a complete reordering of the human heart's attention. It is medicine for the deepest layer of the restless soul. And there is one more layer easily missed that makes the whole teaching land with force. Jesus adds that each day has enough trouble of its own, and therefore we should not add tomorrow's burdens to today's. This is a piece of practical wisdom so precise that modern psychology has only in the last century begun to catch up to it. The anxious mind does not live in the present. It lives in a future that has not happened and may never happen, rehearsing catastrophes, running simulations of disasters that exist nowhere except in the imagination. And the grace of God Jesus is teaching is given for the day you are actually in, not for the imagined days you are borrowing trouble from. You do not have grace today for tomorrow's trial, because you are not yet in tomorrow's trial. But when tomorrow comes, and if the trial comes with it, the grace will be there, given fresh, sufficient for that day. This is why the anxious mind exhausts itself. It is trying to face, all at once and in advance, 100 possible tomorrows for which no grace has yet been given, when it was only ever meant to face the single day in which it actually stands. Learn to live in the day you are in. That is not a slogan, it is one of the deepest secrets of peace that has ever been spoken. Do you understand yet why they only gave you 10? Because each of these teachings, when you actually open it and go inside, does not leave you where it found you. It asks something. It rearranges something. The don't worry version asks nothing of you except a vague and impossible resolution to feel better. The full teaching asks you to relocate the entire center of gravity of your life, away from your own anxious self-management and onto the character and the kingdom of God. One of those is a greeting card. The other is a revolution. And the revolution is harder to hand out, harder to institutionalize, harder to fit into the space between the opening hymn and the closing announcements. So the greeting card is what most people received. But you are here for the revolution, or you would not still be listening. So let us keep going. The teaching. That the last will be first, and why it terrified the powerful. There is a phrase of Jesus so familiar that it has passed into ordinary speech, worn down by use until most people barely register what it originally meant. The last will be first, and the first will be last. We say it, or we hear it, and it registers as a vaguely nice sentiment, a gentle reassurance that the underdog will get their turn eventually. But when Jesus said it, and in the way he said it, and in the context where he kept saying it, again and again, in parable after parable, in confrontation after confrontation, it was not a gentle sentiment. It was a detonation placed at the base of every hierarchy human beings have ever built. Think about what it actually claims. Every society that has ever existed runs on a ranking. There are people at the top and people at the bottom, people who matter and people who are overlooked, people whose names are known and people who are invisible, people who are served and people who serve. This ranking feels as natural and permanent as gravity. The powerful assume their position is the reward for their superiority. The overlooked absorb, often without ever quite deciding to, the message that their low position reflects their low worth. And into that entire structure, a structure so ancient and so universal that most people cannot even see it, the way a fish cannot see water, Jesus drops a single sentence that turns it completely upside down. The last will be first, the first will be last. The whole ranking is not merely unjust. It is, from the perspective of the kingdom of God, precisely inverted. The ones the world has pushed to the back are, in the reality that actually endures, at the front. And the ones the world has placed at the front are, in that same enduring reality, at the back. This is why the powerful found Jesus so threatening, and why this particular strand of his teaching tends to get softened into a harmless proverb. Because if it is true, if the ranking really is inverted in the eyes of the God who created everything and who will have the final word on everything, then every person who has clawed their way to the top of some human pile has been climbing in the wrong direction. And every person who has been trodden down and stepped over and treated as though they did not matter has been, all along, closer to the heart of things than their oppressors ever were. This is not a comfortable teaching for anyone invested in the existing order. It is glorious news for the crushed and the overlooked, and it is a profound and necessary disruption for the comfortable and the elevated. And Jesus taught it constantly. He taught it when he said that whoever wants to be great must become the servant of all. He taught it when he took a child, a person of essentially no status in that society, a nobody, and set the child in the middle of his status-obsessed disciples and said that unless they became like this, they would not even enter the kingdom. He taught it when he said that it is harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God than for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. a statement so shocking to his hearers, who assumed wealth was a sign of divine favor, that they asked in astonishment, "Then who can be saved?" He taught it, in fact, with his entire life, which is the ultimate reason this teaching cannot be softened without destroying it. Because the one who spoke these words was himself the living demonstration of them, the first becoming last, the highest descending to the lowest, the one through whom John tells us all things were made, choosing to be born in a feeding trough in a backwater town, to work with his hands, to have nowhere to lay his head, and finally to be executed in the manner reserved for the most despised and powerless people in the empire. The teaching that the last will be first is not an abstract proverb. It is the shape of God's own movement into the world. And it means that the direction of a truly God-shaped life is not up towards status and recognition and the top of the pile, but down towards service and humility and the places the world has abandoned. That is not a message that sells well. It is not a message that flatters donors or fills grand buildings or advances careers. So it got quietly reduced to a proverb about underdogs. But you have heard it now in something closer to its full and terrible and beautiful weight. Let it do its work, and let it do a particular work in the place where you feel least, because almost everyone carries within them some private ledger of the ways they do not measure up, the achievements they never reached, the recognition they never received, the sense that in the great ranking of the world they landed somewhere disappointing and are quietly ashamed of it. To that private ledger, this teaching speaks directly. The ranking you have been grading yourself against is not the real ranking. The scale the world handed you, the one on which you have been failing, is not the scale on which anything ultimately matters. There is another scale held in the hands of God, and on that scale the faithful and hidden are lifted high, and the celebrated and self-serving are brought low, and your life is being measured right now in all its overlooked ordinariness by that scale and not the other one. Stop grieving your position on a ranking that God has already declared inverted. The last will be first. If the world has placed you last, take heart. You may be closer to the front than you have ever dared to believe. The command to love your enemies, and why it is not naive. Here is a teaching that everyone has heard of, and almost no one has been taught to actually understand, which is a strange and telling combination. Love your enemies. It appears in nearly every list of what Jesus taught. It is quoted at funerals and printed in inspirational books and invoked in 1,000 contexts. And yet the actual content of it, what it means, why he commanded it, and what makes it something other than sentimental foolishness, is rarely opened up. Most people file it away as a beautiful but impractical ideal, the kind of thing that sounds lovely on a Sunday but has no real application on Monday when your actual enemy does the thing your actual enemy actually does. But Jesus was not being naive, and he was not being sentimental, and to understand why, you have to hear the full teaching rather than the 3-word summary. He did not simply say, "Love your enemies," and leave it as a vague and impossible feeling. He got specific, almost uncomfortably specific, about what this love looks like in action. Pray for those who persecute you. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. If someone strikes you on one cheek, do not respond in kind. If someone takes your coat, do not cling to your shirt as well. Notice that not one of these is a command about how to feel. They are all commands about what to do. Jesus is not asking you to manufacture a warm, emotional glow toward the person who has wounded you, which would be impossible and would make the whole teaching a cruel demand. He is asking you to choose a set of actions toward that person that refuses to let their evil determine your behavior. He is asking you to break the chain, because that is what this teaching is actually about when you look at it clearly. It's about breaking the chain of retaliation that has driven human misery since the beginning. The natural law of the human heart is reciprocity. You hurt me, I hurt you. You take from me, I take from you. You hate me, I hate you back. And the cycle turns and turns and never stops, and it consumes families and communities and entire nations across generations. Each act of vengeance justified by the one before it, the whole machine running on the fuel of returned harm. And Jesus, with a wisdom that is the very opposite of naive, identifies the only thing that can ever stop the machine. Someone, at some point, has to absorb the harm without passing it on. Someone has to refuse to add the next link to the chain. Someone has to love the enemy, not with sentiment, but with the concrete decision to do good where evil was done, and thereby break the cycle that would otherwise turn forever. And he gives a reason for this that is the deepest reason of all, and it is the part that almost never gets included. Do this, he says, so that you may be children of your Father in heaven, for he makes his sun rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the just and the unjust. Do you see what he is doing? He is grounding the command to love your enemies in the very nature of God. God does not withhold the sun from the wicked. God does not turn off the rain over the fields of the unjust. God's basic posture toward a rebellious world is not retaliation, but generosity. Sun and rain, provision and patience poured out on people who have done nothing to deserve it and much to forfeit it. And to love your enemy is to participate in that divine nature. It is to become, in the small theater of your own wounded life, a living image of the God who is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. This is not naivety. This is the highest and hardest and most godlike thing a human being can do, and it got reduced to a nice phrase for funerals because in its full form it is nearly unbearable, and it demands of us the one thing the wounded human heart least wants to give, the refusal to return harm for harm, but it is the only thing that has ever healed the world, one broken chain at a time. And he commands it not to burden you, but to free you, because the person consumed by the need to retaliate is never free. The one who can absorb the harm and refuse to pass it on is the only one who has escaped the prison. Love of enemies is not weakness. It is the freedom of a soul that no injury can any longer control. Sit for a moment with that word, freedom, because it is the key that unlocks the whole teaching. We imagine that loving our enemies means letting them win, means becoming a doormat, means surrendering something precious to a person who does not deserve it. But consider what hatred actually does to the one who holds it. The person you cannot forgive lives in your mind rent-free, occupying your thoughts, shaping your moods, dictating your reactions long after the original wound was inflicted. They wounded you once, and then, through your own unforgiveness, they go on wounding you every day because you keep the wound open, you keep the offense alive, you rehearse the injury and refresh the pain. The enemy who lives in your resentment has a power over you that no external enemy could ever achieve. And when Jesus commands you to love that enemy, to bless them, to pray for them, to do them good, he is not handing them a victory. He is prying their fingers off your throat. He is evicting them from the house of your mind. He is setting the prisoner free, and the prisoner, it turns out, was always you. The teaching about the log in your own eye. There is a moment in the teaching of Jesus that is so sharply, almost comedically observed that it is a wonder it does not appear more often, because it diagnoses one of the most universal and destructive habits of the human heart with a precision that has never been improved upon. Why, he asks, do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? Picture it, because Jesus meant for you to picture it. A person walks around with an entire wooden beam protruding from their eye socket, an absurd, impossible cartoonish image. And this person, so encumbered, so blinded, so grotesquely compromised, approaches another person to perform the delicate operation of removing a tiny fleck of dust from that other person's eye. The image is deliberately ridiculous, and the ridiculousness is the point. Jesus is holding up a mirror to the way we live, and he is making it funny precisely so that we cannot escape how true it is. We are all, every one of us, exquisitely attuned to the small faults of others and almost entirely blind to the enormous faults in ourselves. We can spot a fleck of hypocrisy in a neighbor from across a crowded room, while remaining serenely unaware of the great beam of our own hypocrisy that everyone around us can plainly see. This teaching is not, as it is sometimes flattened into being, a command never to make any judgment about anything, a bland instruction to keep your opinions to yourself. Look closely, and you will see that Jesus does not say, "Leave the speck in your brother's eye." He says, first, take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. The goal is still to help your brother. The goal is still that the speck should come out, because a speck in the eye is painful and it impairs vision, and a loving person wants to help. But you cannot perform that delicate and loving work while you yourself are blinded by a beam you have never dealt with. The order matters. Self-examination comes first. The hard, humbling, uncomfortable work of dealing with your own enormous faults comes before and qualifies you for the gentle work of helping another with their smaller ones. And the person who has actually done that work, who has faced the plank, who has known the humbling of removing it, who has felt in their own experience how difficult and how painful and how grace-dependent that process is, that person, and only that person, can be trusted to go near the eye of another. Because they will do it gently, they will do it with humility, they will do it as one who knows exactly how it feels to be the one with something in their eye. The version of this teaching that many people received is either "don't judge," full stop, which is not actually what he said and which paralyzes all honest moral discernment, or else it was skipped entirely because it is so uncomfortably personal. But the full teaching is a masterpiece of spiritual psychology. It names the universal human habit of harsh outward focus and merciful inward blindness. It calls us to reverse the direction of our scrutiny, to become as searching about ourselves as we are naturally inclined to be about everyone else. And it holds out as the reward for that reversal, not the right to condemn, but the capacity to genuinely help, which is a far better and far more difficult thing. There is also a mercy hidden in this teaching that is worth naming, because it can change the way you move through the world. Almost all of the friction, the bitterness, the constant low-grade irritation with other people that so many of us carry comes from the very habit Jesus is describing, the habit of magnifying the faults of others while minimizing our own. We walk around as self-appointed inspectors of everyone else's eyes, and it makes us miserable, because a person who is always scanning for the specks in others is a person who is always finding them, always disappointed, always superior, and always alone. Jesus offers a way out of that misery, and the way out is not to lower your standards, but to turn them inward first. When you have honestly faced the plank in your own eye, when you have felt the full weight of your own need for grace, a strange gentleness begins to grow toward everyone else. You stop being the inspector and start being a fellow patient. And fellow patients, unlike inspectors, are capable of compassion. The teaching that seems at first to be about judgment turns out, in the end, to be about the birth of mercy. Have you noticed what all of these have in common? Every teaching we have opened so far shares a single quality, and it is the quality that got them left out. Each one turns the light back onto the hearer. The kingdom is within you and among you, so stop looking for it out there and start receiving it right here. Your anxiety is a matter of whether you trust the character of God, so the work is in your own believing. The ranking you have absorbed is inverted, so your climbing has been in the wrong direction. The enemy you want to retaliate against is the very arena where you are called to become like God, so the battle is with your own thirst for revenge. The faults you see so clearly in others are dwarfed by the ones you cannot see in yourself, so turn the scrutiny around. Every one of these teachings makes you the project. And a teaching that makes you the project is always harder to receive, harder to spread, and harder to build a comfortable religion around than a teaching that lets you remain a spectator. The 10 you were given tended to be the ones where you could remain a spectator. The 90 that got left out are, overwhelmingly, the ones where you become the point. Let us keep opening them. The teaching that you must lose your life to find it here is a saying of Jesus that is quoted often enough to be familiar and understood rarely enough to remain, for most people, a beautiful puzzle they have never actually solved. Whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. It has the shape of a paradox, and because it has the shape of a paradox, many people admire it the way you might admire a clever riddle, and then move on without ever cracking it open. But Jesus was not offering a riddle for admiration. He was describing the single most important mechanism of a human life, the hidden law that governs whether a person will ever become who they were meant to be, or will spend their whole existence anxiously clutching at a self that keeps slipping through their fingers. Consider what it means to try to save your life in the sense Jesus intends. It means to make the preservation and enhancement of your own self the organizing principle of your existence. To arrange everything around your own security, your own comfort, your own advancement, your own reputation, your own survival. To ask, at every juncture, what is best for me, what protects me, what serves me, what gets me ahead. This looks, on the surface, like simple common sense. It looks like what everyone does, what everyone is supposed to do, what the entire machinery of the world encourages you to do. And Jesus says, with devastating clarity, that this very strategy is the thing that destroys you. Whoever wants to save his life by this grasping and self-protective method will lose it. The self you clutch at so anxiously will crumble in your hands. The life you try so hard to preserve will slip away precisely because you are trying so hard to preserve it. Because a life curved in on itself, organized entirely around its own protection, becomes small and frightened and hollow and finally lost. Not lost in some distant future judgment, but lost right now, in the withering of a soul that was made for something infinitely larger than its own safety. And then the astonishing reversal, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. There is a way of giving your life away, of pouring it out in love, in service, in devotion to God and to others, in the courageous abandonment of self-protection for the sake of something greater than yourself. That does not empty you, but fills you. That does not diminish you, but enlarges you. That does not lose the self, but finds it, discovers it, unlocks it, brings it at last into the fullness it was always meant to have. This is the great secret hidden in plain sight at the center of the teaching of Jesus, and it runs directly against every instinct of the anxious, self-protective, grasping human heart. You do not find yourself by seeking yourself. You find yourself by losing yourself in something worthy of your whole devotion. The people who are most alive, most free, most genuinely themselves are never the ones who spent their lives protecting themselves. They are the ones who gave themselves away and discovered to their astonishment that in the giving they became real. This teaching got left out or reduced to an admired paradox because it asks for the one thing the self is most desperate to keep, which is the self. It asks you to loosen the grip. It asks you to stop the frantic project of self-preservation and self-advancement and self-securing that consumes so much of a human life, and to fall instead into the strange and terrifying and liberating logic of losing yourself into love. And it promises, on the authority of the one who himself lost his life and found it again on the third day, that this is not the road to death, but the only road to life. Everything in you that is anxious will resist this teaching, and everything in you that is deepest and truest will recognize when you finally hear it that it has been waiting for this all along. You have seen this law at work, even if you never named it. Think of the most self-absorbed person you know, the one whose every conversation returns to themselves, whose every decision is calculated for their own advantage, whose whole life orbits around the protection and promotion of their own ego. Are they happy? They are almost never happy. The relentless project of self keeps them anxious, comparing, defending, never satisfied, never at rest. And then think of the people you have known who seem to possess a strange and radiant freedom. A mother who poured herself out for her children without keeping score. A friend who gave without calculating the return. A servant of others who seemed to have forgotten to worry about themselves. There was a lightness to them, a fullness, a life that the self-absorbed never touch. That is the law of Jesus operating in plain sight. The grasping lose, the giving find, and you have watched it prove itself over and over in every life you have ever observed closely, including, if you are honest, your own. The teaching that God runs toward the returning sinner. Perhaps you have heard the story of the prodigal son. It is one that occasionally survives into the abbreviated versions, though even when it survives, it is usually told with its most shocking element carefully removed. So let me tell it to you with the shocking element restored, because the whole meaning lives precisely in the part that gets left out. A man had 2 sons. The younger came to his father and asked for his share of the inheritance, which in that culture was a request so offensive it was very nearly a wish for the father's death, a declaration that the son valued his father's money more than his father's life, and the father astonishingly gave it to him. The son took the money, traveled to a distant country, and squandered everything in wild and reckless living until he had nothing left. A famine struck. He found himself feeding pigs, an image of degradation, almost impossible to overstate for a Jewish audience for whom pigs were unclean, and so hungry that he longed to eat the pods he was feeding to the animals. And there, in the pig field, at the absolute bottom, he came to his senses. He decided to go home, rehearsing a little speech of repentance, hoping only to be taken back as a hired servant, no longer daring to imagine he could be received as a son. Now here is the element that gets removed, the detail that carries the entire weight of the teaching. The son is still a long way off. He is still on the road, still rehearsing his speech, still uncertain of his reception, still braced for rejection. And the father sees him, which means the father was watching. The father was looking down that road, scanning the horizon day after day for the return of a son who had wished him dead and wasted his living. And when the father sees that distant figure, he does something that a dignified man of that age and status in that culture simply did not do. He runs. He picks up his robes and he runs down the road toward his ruined, disgraced, still far-off son. And before the boy can even finish the little speech he has prepared, the father throws his arms around him and kisses him and calls for the best robe and a ring and sandals and a feast, because this son of mine was dead and is alive again, was lost and is found. Do you understand what Jesus is doing with this image? He is showing us the actual heart of God toward the returning sinner, and it is not the heart most people, in their fear, imagine God to have. The God most people carry in their chests is a God who waits with folded arms and a cold expression for the sinner to crawl back and grovel sufficiently before being grudgingly, conditionally readmitted on probation. Jesus obliterates that image. The God he reveals does not wait with folded arms. He watches the road. He runs. He runs while you are still a long way off, while you are still rehearsing your inadequate speech, while you are still braced for the rejection you assume you deserve. He does not wait for you to arrive and prove your repentance and earn your way back. He covers the distance himself. And the celebration is not a grudging readmission, but an explosion of joy, a feast, a restoration to full sonship, because the thing that was lost has come home. This is one of the most emotionally overwhelming teachings in all of human history, and the fact that its central image, the running father, so often gets softened or skipped is a tragedy, because it is precisely that image that so many wounded and fearful people most desperately need. If you have ever believed, somewhere beneath your conscious faith, that God is disappointed in you, that God is reluctant, that God receives you back with a sigh and keeps a ledger of your failures and holds you at arm's length until you have suffered enough to prove your remorse, then this teaching is aimed directly at that wound. God runs. He is not reluctant. He is not cold. He is not keeping the distance you are so afraid he is keeping. He's already on the road, already moving toward you, already closing the gap you thought you had to close alone. Turn toward home, and you will find that he was watching for you the entire time. And do not miss the older brother, because Jesus did not leave him out, though we so often do. There was a second son in that story, the one who stayed home, who did everything right, who never squandered a thing. And when the feast began for his returning brother, he stood outside in the field, seething, refusing to go in, angry that his father would lavish such joy on a son who had wasted everything while he, the faithful one, had never been thrown so much as a party. And the father came out to him too. That is the detail that completes the teaching. The father who runs down the road toward the wayward son also comes out into the field toward the resentful one, because there are two ways to be lost. There is the obvious way of the younger son, lost in a distant country of reckless sin. And there is the hidden way of the older son, lost in the near country of dutiful resentment, standing in his own father's field with a heart cold as stone, a slave in his own home when he could have been a son. And to both of them, the lost in sin and the lost in duty, the Father comes out. He does not wait for either of them to come in on their own. He goes out to both. Whichever son you are today, and most of us are one or the other, and many of us are both by turns, the Father is already coming out to where you are standing. The teaching that the Sabbath was made for you, not you for the Sabbath. Here is a teaching that reveals something about the very heart of God's intentions toward human beings. And it tends to get lost because it emerged out of a controversy that seems, on the surface, remote from modern life. Jesus and his disciples were walking through grain fields on the Sabbath, and the disciples, being hungry, began to pick heads of grain and eat them. The religious authorities pounced. This was work, they said. This violated the Sabbath. And Jesus responded with a sentence that reaches far beyond the specific dispute and lands directly on the question of what all of God's commands are ultimately for. The Sabbath, he said, was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Sit with the reversal contained in that sentence, because it is enormous. The religious system of his day had, over centuries, gradually transformed the Sabbath from a gift into a burden. What God had given as a merciful provision, a whole day, every week, when human beings were commanded to rest, to cease their striving, to remember that their worth did not depend on their productivity, to be refreshed in body and soul, had been buried under such an accumulation of rules and restrictions and prohibitions that it had become one more source of anxiety, one more arena in which people could fail, one more heavy yoke laid across already burdened shoulders. The thing God gave to lift people up had been twisted into something that pressed them down, and Jesus, in a single sentence, cuts through the entire distortion and restores the original intention. The Sabbath was made for man. It is a gift. It exists for your benefit. You were never meant to be crushed beneath it. It was meant to hold you up. And the principle reaches far beyond the Sabbath, which is why this teaching matters so much and why its loss is so costly. Because the same distortion that ruined the Sabbath can ruin every good thing God has ever given. Prayer, which is meant to be intimate communion with a loving Father, can be twisted into an anxious performance you are always afraid you are doing wrong. Scripture, which is meant to be food for the soul, can be twisted into a weapon of condemnation. Worship, which is meant to be the overflow of a grateful heart, can be twisted into a grim obligation you drag yourself to out of fear. The entire structure of faith, which God designed to give life, can be gradually distorted by the anxious and controlling human heart into a system that takes life away. And this one sentence of Jesus stands as a permanent corrective against all of it. Whatever God gives, He gives for your good. It was made for you. You were not made for it. If your religion has become a crushing weight, something has gone wrong that Jesus came specifically to fix, because the God He reveals is not in the business of laying burdens on His children. He is in the business of lifting them. And here is a piece of that gift most people never claim because they were never told it was theirs to claim. Rest is not a reward you earn after you have finished everything. It is a command you are given in the middle of everything unfinished. Notice that the Sabbath comes every week, regardless of whether the work is done. And the work is never done. There is always more that could be produced, more that could be accomplished, more that could be secured. And into that endless demand, God speaks a startling and liberating word: stop. Not because everything is finished, but because you are not a machine, and your worth was never located in your output. The command to rest is God's weekly reminder that the world does not in fact depend on you, that it was held together before you were born and will be held together after you are gone. That you are a beloved creature and not an inexhaustible engine. To rest is to preach that truth to your own anxious heart with your body. It is to lie down in the middle of the unfinished and declare, by the very act of ceasing, that God is God and you are not, and that this is the best news you will ever hear. The teaching about the two debtors, and why the forgiven love more. There is a scene that rarely makes it into the abbreviated tellings, and yet it contains one of the most penetrating insights into the human heart that Jesus ever offered. He was dining at the house of a respectable religious man, a Pharisee named Simon, and into this respectable gathering came a woman of the city, a woman with a reputation, the kind of woman whose very presence in such a house was a scandal. She came to Jesus, and she wept, and her tears fell on his feet, and she wiped them with her hair and anointed them with expensive perfume. In an outpouring of emotion so extravagant and so uninhibited that it made everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. And Simon the Pharisee thought to himself with cold contempt that if this Jesus were really a prophet, he would know what kind of woman was touching him. Jesus, knowing his thoughts, told him a small story. Two people owed money to a moneylender. One owed a huge sum, the other a small one. Neither could pay, and the moneylender forgave them both. Now Jesus asked, which of them will love him more? Simon, somewhat grudgingly, gave the obvious answer, the one who was forgiven more. And Jesus, having led him into his own conclusion, turned it like a key. You are right, he said. And then he drew the devastating comparison. This woman whom you despise has shown me overwhelming love, the tears, the perfume, the humility, because she knows how much she has been forgiven. And you, Simon, who showed me none of these things, who did not even offer me the basic courtesies of a host, love little, because you imagine you have been forgiven little. Here is the insight. And it turns the entire respectable religious world upside down. The capacity to love God extravagantly is directly proportional to your awareness of how much you have been forgiven. The people who love God most are not the ones who have sinned least. They are the ones who are most aware of the depth of their own need for mercy and of the immensity of the mercy they have received. And this means that a certain kind of respectable religiosity, the kind that keeps the rules, avoids the scandalous sins, and quietly congratulates itself on not being like the woman weeping on the floor, is actually a profound spiritual disadvantage. Because the person who believes they have been forgiven little will love little. Their heart remains cool, correct, controlled, and closed, while the person who knows the true extent of their own brokenness, who has felt the full weight of what they needed to be forgiven for, is thrown open by gratitude into an extravagant love that the respectable person cannot even comprehend and can only stand back and judge. This teaching got left out because it flatters no one who is comfortable. It suggests that our respectability may be the very thing keeping us at a cool distance from God. It suggests that the people we look down on may be closer to the heart of things than we are, precisely because they have no illusions about their need. And it invites all of us, respectable and scandalous alike, to stop measuring ourselves against each other and to face instead the true depth of our own need for mercy, because it is only there, in the honest recognition of how much we have been forgiven, that the heart is finally thrown open into the kind of love God has been waiting for us to feel. If your love for God has grown cool, the problem is almost never that you have been forgiven too little. It is that you have forgotten how much you have been forgiven. The cure for a cold heart is not to try harder to feel warmth. It is to go back and look, honestly and without flinching, at the true depth of the pit from which you were lifted, and to let the sighs of the rescue reignite the sighs of the love. The teaching that you cannot serve two masters, you cannot serve both God and money. It is one of the more familiar sayings, and yet familiarity has dulled its edge until most people hear it as a mild caution against greed rather than the absolute, uncompromising declaration it actually is. Jesus did not say it is difficult to serve both God and money. He did not say you should be careful about serving both God and money. He said you cannot. It is not possible. You will, in the end, love the one and hate the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. There is no arrangement, no clever compromise, no balanced portfolio of divided loyalty in which both can occupy the throne of your life at once. One of them will rule. The only question is which. Why did he speak with such absolute finality? Because he understood something about the human heart that we are endlessly reluctant to admit. That money is not merely a neutral tool, a convenient medium of exchange, but a rival god with a genuine claim to worship, a power that presents itself as the answer to every fear and the key to every security. Money promises what only God can actually give. It promises safety. If you have enough, nothing can touch you. It promises freedom. If you have enough, you can do whatever you want. It promises worth. If you have enough, you must be someone who matters. It promises a future secured against every uncertainty. And these promises exert a gravitational pull on the human heart so powerful that most people organize their entire lives around the accumulation of the thing that makes the promises, without ever consciously deciding to worship it. That is what makes it a master. Not the paper, not the numbers in an account, but the deep orientation of the heart toward money as the source of the security and the significance that God alone can truly provide. And so the choice Jesus lays before every person is not a choice between having money and not having money. It is a choice about what sits on the throne. It is a choice about where you actually go in the secret movements of your heart, for your sense of safety and your sense of worth and your defense against the future. Do you go to God or do you go to the account balance? When you lie awake at night afraid, what is it that you reach for in your mind as the thing that will make you safe? The answer to that question reveals your true master, whatever your stated beliefs may be. And Jesus, with a love that refuses to leave us in a comfortable illusion, tells us plainly that we cannot have it both ways. We cannot keep God as our official religion and money as our actual security. The heart has one throne, and the entire trajectory of a person's life is determined by who is sitting on it. This teaching got softened into a gentle warning about greed, because in its full form, it is a demand for a fundamental reckoning with where our security actually rests. And that reckoning is uncomfortable for nearly everyone, because nearly everyone has, to some degree, been quietly serving the master they were told they could not serve, all while believing they were serving God. Jesus does not offer this teaching to shame us. He offers it to free us, because the one who serves money is never at rest. There is never enough. The fear never fully lifts. The future never becomes truly secure. And the one who is freed from that master who has moved their trust to the God who actually holds the future discovers a rest that no amount of accumulation could ever purchase. He is not trying to take something from you. He is trying to move you off a throne that was always going to collapse and onto the only foundation that will hold. The teaching about the widow's 2 small coins. Jesus was sitting near the temple treasury, watching the crowd put money into the offering. Many rich people threw in large amounts, the coins clattering impressively into the metal receptacles, the giving public and visible and admired. And then a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins worth almost nothing, the smallest denomination in circulation. And Jesus called his disciples over to make sure they did not miss what had just happened. And he said something that completely reversed the way every person in that courtyard was measuring the value of what was being given. This poor widow, he said, has put in more than all the others, for they all gave out of their wealth, but she, out of her poverty, put in everything, all she had to live on. Do you see the reversal? By every visible measure, the rich gave more. Their coins were more numerous, more valuable, more impressive. If you were keeping a ledger of the temple's income, the widow's contribution would not have registered at all. It was too small to matter. And Jesus looks at exactly the same scene and declares that she gave the most, more than all the others combined, because he is not measuring the amount given, he is measuring the amount kept back. The rich gave large sums and kept back even larger ones. Their giving cost them nothing, changed nothing, required nothing of them. The widow gave 2 small coins and kept back nothing at all. Her giving was everything she had, an act of total trust, a placing of her entire material survival into the hands of God. And in the economy of the kingdom, which measures the heart rather than the sum, hers was the largest gift given that day. This teaching demolishes one of the most persistent illusions of the religious life, which is the illusion that God is impressed by size, by quantity, by the visible impressiveness of what we offer. He is not. He looks past the amount entirely and reads the heart behind it. He sees what the gift cost. He sees what was risked, what was trusted, what was held back, and what was surrendered. And by that measure, the calculus of value is turned completely upside down. The impressive gift that costs nothing is worth nothing. The tiny gift that costs everything is worth more than all the rest. And this is unbearably liberating news for anyone who has ever felt that they have too little to offer God. Too little money, too little talent, too little influence, too little of whatever the world counts as significant. Because God is not counting what the world counts. He is looking at the widow with her 2 small coins, and he is calling his disciples over, and he is saying, "Do not miss this one. She has given more than all of them. Whatever you have given wholly is more in his sight than the vast surplus of those who gave from what they would never miss." Are you beginning to see the shape of it? We have now opened more than a dozen of the teachings that so often get left out, and a pattern has emerged that is worth pausing to name, because seeing the pattern helps you recognize the others for yourself. Nearly every one of these overlooked teachings performs the same essential move. It takes a measure that the world holds as obvious and reverses it. The world measures the kingdom by visible power. Jesus measures it by hidden growth. The world measures worth by rank. Jesus inverts the rank. The world measures a gift by its size. Jesus measures it by its cost. The world measures love by whether the other person deserves it. Jesus measures it by whether you are willing to give it to your enemy. Again and again, he takes the scale the world trusts and turns it over. And on the reversed scale, everything looks different. The last are first, the poor widow gives most, the forgiven sinner loves more, the one who loses his life finds it. This is why so much of his teaching got left out. Because we live inside the world's measures so completely that a teaching which reverses them feels not just challenging, but almost unbelievable. And it is far easier to keep the 10 teachings that leave our measures intact than to receive the 90 that overturn them. But you are here for the overturning. So let us continue. The teaching that many who are confident will be surprised. This is one of the more sobering teachings, and it is almost entirely absent from the comfortable versions, for reasons that will become obvious. Jesus said that not everyone who says to him, "Lord, Lord," will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of his Father. And he went further, describing a scene of startling gravity. Many will come to him on that final day and say, "Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name?" And he will say to them, "I never knew you." This is not a teaching designed to make anyone comfortable, and it was clearly not intended to be. It cuts directly against a certain kind of religious confidence, the confidence of people who have the right words, who perform the right activities, who may even do impressive things in the name of God, but whose hearts have never actually been known by him, never actually been surrendered to him, never actually entered into the living relationship. That is the whole point. The people in this scene are not obvious hypocrites. They are not scandalous sinners. They are religiously active, verbally correct, apparently fruitful. They say the right name, they do things in that name, and still he says, "I never knew you," which means the thing that matters is not the words or the activities or even the apparent results, but whether there was ever a real relationship, whether he knew them and they knew him, in the deep and personal and transforming sense that no amount of religious performance can substitute for. Why does this sobering teaching matter so much? And why is its absence from the comfortable versions so costly? Because it guards against the single most dangerous condition of the religious soul, which is the condition of false assurance, of believing yourself to be secure on the basis of external religious markers, while the internal reality of relationship with God has quietly never come into being. It is entirely possible, Jesus warns, to be busy in religion and unknown by God. It is possible to have all the right vocabulary and all the right activities, and to have missed the one thing that was ever actually being asked of you, which is not performance but relationship, not saying "Lord, Lord," but actually being known by him, and actually doing the will of the Father from a heart that has been made new. This teaching is a mercy, though it does not feel like one, because it comes now, while there is still time to respond to it, while you can still stop and ask the searching question of whether your faith is a matter of external markers or of a heart actually known by God. It got left out because it disturbs the false peace of religious confidence. But that false peace is precisely the thing most worth disturbing, because it is the peace that leads, unexamined, to the most terrible surprise of all. Better to be disturbed now and to seek the reality than to be surprised then when the seeking is over. And notice the tender word buried in the terror of it, "Knew. I never knew you." The tragedy Jesus describes is not primarily a failure of performance, but a failure of relationship. He does not say, You did not work hard enough, or you did not achieve enough, or your results were insufficient. He says, in effect, we were never actually close. There was activity but no intimacy, service but no friendship, a great deal done for him but very little shared with him. And this reframes the whole of the spiritual life. The point was never to accumulate a resume of religious accomplishment to present to God as evidence of your worth. The point was to know him and be known by him, to walk with him in the daily and ordinary intimacy of a real relationship. If you have been exhausting yourself building a religious resume, this teaching offers you the most freeing possible redirection. Put it down. He is not asking for your accomplishments. He is asking for you. Come and be known. The teaching about the narrow gate. Related to this, and equally absent from the comfortable versions, is the teaching about the narrow gate. Enter through the narrow gate, Jesus said, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it. This teaching offends the modern sensibility almost more than any other, because it insists on something we very much do not want to hear, that the path to life is not the default path, not the path of least resistance, not the wide and easy road that everyone is already on. It is narrow, it requires intention, it requires choosing against the current, against the crowd, against the broad and comfortable way that the majority travels without ever questioning where it leads. And this is difficult for us, not because it is unclear, but because it is exclusive in a way our age has been trained to reject. We want all roads to lead to the same good place. We want the wide and easy way to be just as valid as the narrow and difficult one. And Jesus, with a sober honesty that refuses to flatter us, says that it is not so. There is a way that leads to life, and it is not the way most people are traveling, and finding it requires the deliberate choice to enter through a gate that is narrow enough that you cannot bring with you all the baggage the broad road lets you carry. But notice what the narrowness actually is, because this is where the teaching, rightly understood, turns from threat to invitation. The gate is narrow, not because God is stingy with life, not because he wants to keep people out, but because entering it requires you to set down the very things that are weighing you down. You cannot bring your self-sufficiency through a narrow gate. You cannot bring your pride, your need to be your own master, your grasping accumulation, your comfortable illusions. The narrowness is not cruelty, it is the specific shape of surrender. It is narrow the way the birth canal is narrow, a tight and difficult passage that opens onto life. And the reason few find it is not that God has hidden it maliciously, but that most people are unwilling to set down what the gate requires them to set down, preferring the broad road precisely because on the broad road they can keep everything, change nothing, and travel comfortably in the company of the crowd. Jesus tells us the truth about this because he loves us too much to let us drift unquestioning down a road whose destination we have never seriously considered. The narrow gate is a hard teaching, but it is hard the way all real love is hard. It tells you the truth you need rather than the comfort you want. And it does so precisely so that you might find the life that the easy road can never reach. The teaching that the heart is the real battlefield. One of the most radical things Jesus ever did was to relocate the entire drama of morality from the outside of a person to the inside. The religious system of his day, like every religious and moral system human beings have ever built, focused primarily on external behavior. Did you do the forbidden act or not? Did you commit the murder, the adultery, the theft? Morality was a matter of the visible deed, and Jesus took that entire framework and drove it inward with a series of statements that must have stunned his hearers. You have heard that it was said, "Do not murder." But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. You have heard that it was said, 'Do not commit adultery.' But I tell you that anyone who looks at another with lust has already committed adultery in his heart." Do you feel the seismic shift? Jesus is saying that the real action, the real morality, the real battlefield of a human life is not primarily the external deed, but the internal condition of the heart from which the deed proceeds. The murder begins long before the blow is struck, in the nursed anger, the cultivated contempt, the quiet wish that the other person did not exist. The adultery begins long before the act, in the lust entertained, the fantasy fed, the objectifying gaze that has already in the secret theater of the heart used another person as an object. And by relocating morality to the heart, Jesus does two things at once that together transform the entire moral life. First, he removes forever the possibility of the smug external righteousness that congratulates itself on not having committed the visible sins, while the heart seethes with the very things those sins express. And second, and this is the part that gets missed, he opens the door to a far deeper kind of transformation than mere behavior management could ever provide. Because here is what the relocation of morality to the heart actually means for you. It means that God is not ultimately in the business of managing your behavior. He is in the business of transforming your heart. The goal was never simply to get you to stop doing bad things while you remained, on the inside, a person who wanted to do them and was merely restraining yourself. The goal is a new heart, a heart from which the anger and the lust and the contempt and the greed no longer flow, because the inner source of them has been healed. This is infinitely more demanding than external rule-keeping, because you cannot manage your way into it. You cannot simply decide to stop wanting what you want. And it is also infinitely more hopeful, because it means that God is not asking you merely to perform righteousness through gritted teeth for the rest of your life. He is offering to change what you are at the source, so that righteousness begins to flow from a transformed nature rather than being extracted from an unwilling one. The battlefield is the heart, and the good news buried in that hard truth is that the heart is exactly what God has come to renew. The teaching about becoming like a child. The disciples once came to Jesus with a question that reveals everything about the water they were swimming in. Who, they asked, is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? They wanted a ranking. They wanted to know where they stood, who was ahead, who was the most important. And Jesus, instead of answering with a name or a set of qualifications, called a little child to him and placed the child in the middle of them and said, "Truly, I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." To understand the force of this, you have to understand that in the ancient world, children had no status whatsoever. They were not sentimentalized the way modern culture sentimentalizes childhood. A child was a person of no power, no achievement, no rights, no standing. A dependent, a nobody, someone at the very bottom of the social order. So when Jesus took a child and set it in the middle of these status-hungry men who wanted to know who was greatest, he was making a deliberate and shocking point. The very thing you are competing to escape, lowliness, dependence, insignificance in the eyes of the world, is the very thing you must become in order to enter the kingdom at all. The whole direction of your striving is backwards. You are trying to become great, to climb, to accumulate the markers of importance. And I am telling you that the door into the kingdom is shaped in such a way that only the small can pass through it. But there is a tenderness in this teaching alongside its challenge, and the tenderness is essential. What is it about a child that Jesus is pointing to? It is not innocence in some sentimental sense, and it is not ignorance. It is dependence. A small child does not earn its place in the family. It does not achieve its way into being loved. It simply receives food, shelter, care, love as a gift it did not merit and could not have provided for itself. A child trusts. A child rests in the provision of a parent without anxiety about whether it has done enough to deserve that provision. And this, Jesus says, is the posture of the kingdom, not the anxious striving of the adult who must earn everything and prove everything and secure everything, but the restful receiving of the child who simply trusts that it is held. To become like a child is to lay down the exhausting project of earning your way and to receive the kingdom as what it always was, a gift given by a father to those who are willing to stop striving and simply hold out their hands. For the weary adult who has spent a lifetime trying to earn a place, this is not a demotion. It is a homecoming. The teaching that he came for the sick, not the healthy. When the religious authorities criticized Jesus for eating with tax collectors and sinners, for spending his time with the disreputable, the compromised, the morally scandalous, he gave an answer that defines his entire mission with a single sharp image. It is not the healthy who need a doctor, he said, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. There is a terrible irony buried in this teaching, and it is the irony that makes it so easily lost on exactly the people who most need to hear it. Jesus is saying that he came for the sick, for those who know they are sick, who feel their need, who are aware of their brokenness and their failure and their desperate requirement for a physician. And the tragedy is that the people who criticized him, the respectable religious authorities, were just as sick as the tax collectors and sinners they despised. But they did not know it. They believed themselves to be healthy. And a sick person who believes themselves healthy will never seek the doctor, will never receive the cure, will remain sick precisely because they are convinced they have no need. Their imagined health is the very thing that keeps them from the healing they actually require. This is why Jesus spent his time where he spent it. Not because he approved of sin, but because the people crushed under the weight of their sin, the people who knew they were sick, were the ones capable of receiving what he came to give. And the people who imagined themselves righteous, who had no felt sense of their own need, were closed to him by the very self-image they were so proud of. This teaching contains an urgent and personal question for every one of us. Which are you? Do you come to God as the sick come to the doctor, aware of your need, holding out your brokenness, asking to be healed? Or do you come as one of the healthy, secure in your own righteousness, offering God your respectability and secretly believing you do not require much from him? Because the whole of the gospel is available to the first person and almost entirely closed to the second, not because God withholds it from the respectable, but because the respectable, imagining themselves well, never actually reach out for the cure. The door is open, but only those who know they are sick will walk through it. Blessed, then, is the person who has stopped pretending to be healthy. Their honesty about their sickness is the very thing that qualifies them for the healing. The teaching about forgiving, 70 times 7. Peter, perhaps feeling rather generous, came to Jesus with a question about the limits of forgiveness. Lord, he asked, how many times shall I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? Peter almost certainly expected praise for his magnanimity, because the religious teaching of the day suggested that forgiving someone 3 times was sufficient, and Peter had more than doubled it. And Jesus answered, I tell you, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. Which is to say, in the idiom of the time, a number beyond counting, an unlimited number. Stop keeping the ledger altogether. And then, to make sure the teaching landed with full weight, Jesus told a story that reveals why forgiveness must be unlimited. A servant owed his king an astronomical, unpayable debt, the kind of sum that could never be repaid in many lifetimes. The king, moved by the servant's desperate plea, forgave the entire debt, simply cancelled it. And this same servant, newly and completely forgiven of an incomprehensible debt, went out and found a fellow servant who owed him a trivial sum, a tiny fraction of what he himself had just been forgiven, and he seized him by the throat and demanded payment and threw him into prison when he could not pay. And when the king heard of it, he was filled with anger, and he delivered the unforgiving servant to be punished, saying, "Should you not have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?" The teaching here is not a mathematical formula for forgiveness. It is a revelation of the logic that must govern the forgiven heart. Every one of us, Jesus is saying, is the servant who owed the unpayable debt. Every one of us has been forgiven by God an amount so vast that it could never have been repaid. A debt of the whole self, the whole history of failure, the whole weight of everything we have done and left undone. And in the light of that immense forgiveness we have received, the debts that others owe us, the wounds, the slights, the betrayals, real as they are and painful as they are the trivial sum by comparison. This does not mean the wounds do not matter. It means that a person who has truly grasped the immensity of their own forgiveness cannot then turn around and clutch tightly at the small debts owed to them, because to do so is to reveal that they never really understood what they themselves were forgiven. The forgiven forgive. Not because forgiveness is easy, and not because the wounds are small, but because the heart that has been flooded with an ocean of mercy cannot then withhold a cup of it from someone else without contradicting the very grace that saved it. Unlimited forgiveness is not a burden laid on you from outside. It is the natural overflow of a heart that has finally understood how much it has been given. The teaching that the greatest among you must serve. On the last night of his life, in the hours before his betrayal and arrest, Jesus did something that his disciples never forgot, and that overturns the entire human understanding of greatness and authority. He rose from the meal, took off his outer garment, wrapped a towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and began to wash the feet of his disciples, performing the task of the lowest household servant, the dirty and degrading work of cleaning the road filth from the feet of others, the master washing the feet of his students, the teacher kneeling before those he taught. And when he had finished, he explained what he had done. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you." This is the teaching that most completely inverts the world's understanding of what it means to be great, and it is dramatized rather than merely spoken, which is why it strikes so deep. In every human hierarchy, greatness flows upward and service flows downward. The great are served, the lowly serve. The higher your position, the more people wait on you, and the fewer people you wait on. Status is measured precisely by how many serve you and how few you must serve. And Jesus, the one being in that room with any genuine claim to ultimate authority, took the basin and the towel and reversed the entire flow. He served downward from the position of highest authority, and in doing so, he redefined greatness itself for anyone willing to follow him. Greatness, in the kingdom he came to establish, is not measured by how many serve you, but by how many you serve. The path upward is the path downward. The greatest is the servant of all. And he was not merely teaching a lesson about humility as one virtue among many. He was revealing the very nature of God, because this is what God is like. The God of the universe is not a distant potentate served by trembling subjects. He is the God who kneels with the basin and the towel. He is the God who, in the person of Jesus, would within hours lay down his life entirely in the ultimate act of downward flowing love. The foot washing was a preview of the cross, and the cross is the fullest revelation of who God is, a God whose greatness expresses itself not in being served, but in serving, not in taking, but in giving, not in being lifted up by others, but in lowering himself for their sake. To follow this God, then, is to take up the basin and the towel in your own life, to find your greatness precisely where the world would never look for it, in the willingness to serve, to stoop, to do the unglamorous and unnoticed work of love. This teaching got dramatized on the last night precisely because it is the summary of everything, and yet how rarely it is placed at the center of what people are told Jesus taught. It belongs at the center. It is the shape of God. The teaching about the sower and the soils. Jesus told a story about a farmer scattering seed, and it is one of the few parables that occasionally survives into the abbreviated versions, though usually stripped of its most personally penetrating application. A farmer went out to sow. Some seed fell on the path and was eaten by birds. Some fell on rocky ground where the soil was shallow, and it sprang up quickly, but withered when the sun rose because it had no root. Some fell among thorns, which grew up and choked it. And some fell on good soil and produced a crop, multiplying far beyond what was sown. Jesus explained that the seed is the word of God, and the different soils are the different conditions of the human heart that receives it. And this is where the teaching becomes uncomfortably personal, because it forces a question that most of us would rather not ask. The issue the parable insists is not primarily the seed. The seed is good. The seed is the same in every case. The word of God is powerful and full of life. The issue is the soil. The issue is the condition of the heart that receives it. The same word that produces 100-fold harvest in one heart produces nothing in another, not because the word is different, but because the soil is different. And so the parable turns the searchlight around and asks each of us, what kind of soil are you? Are you the hardened path where the word cannot even penetrate, where it sits on the surface of a heart too compacted by cynicism or busyness or resistance to let it in, and is snatched away before it can take root? Are you the rocky ground, where the word is received at first with great enthusiasm and emotion, but where there is no depth, no root, so that when difficulty or opposition comes, the shallow faith withers away? Are you the thorny ground, where the word does take root, but is slowly, quietly strangled by the competing growth of the worries of life, and the deceitfulness of wealth, and the desire for other things, until it is choked into unfruitfulness? Or are you the good soil, the receptive heart, prepared and open and willing, in which the word can sink deep and take root, and grow and produce a harvest beyond anything that was sown? This teaching does not let you remain a spectator, which is precisely why it is so valuable and so often defanged. It hands you the responsibility for the condition of your own heart. The seed is not the variable. You are. And the wonderful and hopeful thing hidden in this hard truth is that soil can be changed. The hardened path can be broken up. The rocks can be dug out. The thorns can be pulled. A heart that is poor soil today can, through honest attention and the grace of God, become good soil tomorrow. The parable is not a fixed diagnosis. It is an invitation to prepare the ground. The teaching about the Good Samaritan and who your neighbor really is a religious expert wanting to test Jesus and perhaps to justify himself, asked what seemed like a reasonable question. And who is my neighbor? He had been told to love his neighbor as himself, and like all of us, he wanted to know the boundaries of the obligation, where the circle of required love ended, so that he could love those inside it and feel no guilt about the ones outside. It is a very human question. We are always trying to draw the circle small enough that we can actually complete the assignment and then rest. And Jesus, instead of answering with a definition, told a story that exploded the question entirely. A man was traveling down a dangerous road when robbers attacked him, stripped him, beat him, and left him half dead in the ditch. A priest came along, saw the wounded man, and passed by on the other side. A Levite, another religious official, did the same, saw him, and crossed to the far side of the road to avoid him. And then came a Samaritan. Now you have to understand what that word meant to the people listening. Samaritans were the despised outsiders, the ethnic and religious enemies, the people a respectable Jew of that day would have crossed the street to avoid on a good day. And it is precisely this despised outsider who stopped, who was moved with compassion, who bandaged the man's wounds, who put him on his own animal, who took him to an inn and paid for his care out of his own pocket and promised to cover whatever more was needed. The hero of the story is the last person the audience would ever have chosen. That was deliberate. That was the whole point. And then Jesus turned the expert's question inside out. The man had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" Meaning, who qualifies as a recipient of my love? Where is the boundary? And Jesus, at the end of the story, asked instead, which of these three was a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers? Do you see the reversal? The question is no longer who deserves my love, who fits inside my circle. The question is whether I will be a neighbor, whether I will become the kind of person who crosses every boundary of race and religion and comfort and convenience to show mercy to whoever is in front of me in need. Jesus refuses to let us draw the circle small. He erases the circle altogether. Your neighbor is not a category of people who qualify. Your neighbor is anyone at all, whom you have the opportunity to help. And the true child of God is known not by the correctness of their theology or the respectability of their position. The priest and the Levite had both of those, but by whether, when they see someone bleeding in the ditch, they stop. This teaching got softened into a general encouragement to be nice, when in fact it is a demolition of every wall we build to limit the reach of our compassion. Go and do likewise, Jesus said. Not go and feel warmly. Go and do. The teaching that what you do to the least, you do to him. Here is a teaching so weighty that it should stop us in our tracks every time. And yet, it is one of the most consistently overlooked in the entire body of what Jesus taught. He described the final judgment, the gathering of all the nations, the great separation, and the criterion he named was not the one anyone expected. He did not separate people based on their doctrinal precision or their religious activity or the intensity of their spiritual experiences. He separated them based on this: I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. And the righteous, in his telling, are genuinely puzzled. When, they ask, did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? They do not remember ever encountering Jesus in any of these conditions. And the king answers with the sentence that should reorganize the way we see every human being we will ever meet. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Do you grasp what he is claiming? He is saying that he has so identified himself with the poor, the hungry, the imprisoned, the sick, the stranger, the overlooked, that whatever is done to them is done to him. The hungry person you passed today was, in some real and mysterious sense, Jesus in disguise. The stranger, the prisoner, the sick and forgotten, he has hidden himself in them so that our treatment of the least powerful people around us is, whether we know it or not, our treatment of God himself. This transforms the whole meaning of how we live among the vulnerable. It means there is no such thing as an insignificant person, no such thing as a life beneath our notice, because the King of the universe has taken up residence in the very people the world considers least worth its time. And it means that love of God, which can otherwise remain a comfortable abstraction, is given a concrete and unavoidable test. What do you actually do when a hungry or hurting or imprisoned or forgotten human being is placed in front of you? Because in that moment, Jesus insists it is not merely a person in front of you, it is him, This teaching got left out or reduced to a vague endorsement of charity because in its full form it makes an absolute and searching claim on how we treat the people the world has thrown away. But that claim is one of the most beautiful things he ever said, because it means that no act of love toward the lowest is ever wasted or unseen. It reaches all the way to the throne. The teaching about the hidden reward, do not sound the trumpet. There is a teaching about how to do good that most people have never had opened up for them, and it cuts against one of the strongest instincts in the human heart, the instinct to be seen. When you give to the needy, Jesus said, do not announce it with trumpets as the hypocrites do, to be honored by others. When you pray, do not stand in the public places to be seen praying. When you fast, do not disfigure your face to show others you are fasting. And then he named the reason, and it is a reason that reorganizes the entire economy of goodness. Those who do their good deeds to be seen by others, he said, have received their reward in full. That is all they will ever get, the seeing, the admiring glance, the moment of recognition. They wanted to be noticed, and they were noticed, and the transaction is complete. There is nothing further coming. But your Father, Jesus said, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Do you feel the weight of that reversal? There are two audiences you can play to, and you must choose one, because you cannot fully play to both. You can perform your goodness for the audience of other people, in which case their approval is your entire and only wage. A wage that is real but small, and that evaporates the moment their attention moves on. Or you can do your goodness for the audience of one, the Father who sees in secret, in which case the applause of the crowd is not what you are after, and its absence does not trouble you, because your reward is coming from a source that does not evaporate. The hypocrite and the faithful person may do the very same outward act, the same gift, the same prayer, the same fast. The difference is invisible, located entirely in the question of whose eyes they are living for. This teaching got left out because it exposes something we would rather not examine, which is how much of our apparent goodness is actually a performance staged for human approval. How much of what looks like generosity is really a bid for admiration. How much of what looks like devotion is really a display. Jesus is not condemning good deeds. He is purifying them. He is inviting you into the extraordinary freedom of a life lived before an audience of one. A life in which you no longer need to be seen, no longer need to be thanked, no longer need anyone to notice, because the only eyes whose approval you are living for have already seen everything and love you completely. There is a deep rest in that. The person who needs to be seen is enslaved to the fickle attention of others, always performing, always anxious about the reception. The person who lives before the Father who sees in secret is free. Free to do good quietly, to give without announcement, to pray in the closet, to love without being noticed, and to carry a hidden reward that no one can take away because no one but God even knows it is there. The teaching about the vine and the branches, you cannot do it alone. On that same last night, Jesus gave his disciples an image that contains one of the most freeing and most frequently ignored truths in all of his teaching. I am the vine, he said, and you are the branches. Remain in me, and I in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Consider what a branch actually is and does. A branch does not manufacture life within itself. It does not strain and strive to produce fruit through its own effort. A branch bears fruit for one reason only, because it is connected to the vine, and the life of the vine flows up through it, and out of that received life the fruit simply grows. The branch's entire job is to remain connected. That is all. It does not have to understand the mysterious chemistry of how sap becomes grape. It does not have to force anything. It abides, it remains, it stays, joined to the source, and the fruit comes as the natural consequence of the connection. And Jesus takes that image and applies it to the whole of the spiritual life with a phrase that should lift an enormous weight off every exhausted believer. Apart from me, you can do nothing. Now, most people hear that phrase as a kind of scolding. Apart from me, you can do nothing, so you had better shape up. But that is exactly backwards. It is not a scolding. It is a liberation. Because if apart from him you can do nothing, then the crushing project of producing a good and holy life through the sheer force of your own willpower was never going to work. And you can finally stop attempting the impossible. The fruit of a transformed life, the love, the joy, the peace, the patience, the goodness that you have been trying so hard to squeeze out of yourself, was never meant to be manufactured by you at all. It was meant to grow out of you as the natural result of your connection to the source. Your job is not to produce the fruit. Your job is to remain in the vine, to stay connected, to abide in him through prayer, through his word, through the ongoing communion of a life lived in his presence. And out of that connection, the life of God flows up through you, and the fruit grows, and it grows not by your straining, but by his life. This teaching got left out, or reduced to a nice metaphor, because it dismantles the entire self-improvement model of religion that so many of us have absorbed, the model in which spiritual growth is your project, your achievement, the product of your discipline and your effort. Jesus offers something completely different and infinitely more restful. Stop trying to be the vine. You are the branch. Your whole calling is to remain connected to the one whose life produces the fruit. The pressure is off. You were never asked to generate the life. You were only ever asked to receive it and to stay close enough to the source that it can flow into you. Abide in him and the fruit will come. Not because you forced it, but because that is simply what happens to a branch that remains in the vine. The teaching about the speck of faith that moves mountains. The disciples once asked Jesus to increase their faith, as though faith were a quantity, a substance you could accumulate in greater and greater volumes, and as though the reason they were not seeing more was that they simply did not have enough of it yet. And Jesus answered them with an image that gently overturned the whole way they were thinking about it. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, he said, the smallest of all seeds, a speck you could barely hold between two fingers, you could say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it would move. Notice what he is doing. The disciples wanted more faith, a greater quantity, a larger supply, and Jesus redirects them entirely away from the question of quantity. He does not say, yes, you need much more faith, work hard to accumulate a great store of it. He says, the smallest possible amount, a mustard seed, a speck, is enough to move a mountain, which means the power was never in the size of the faith. If a speck can move a mountain, then adding more faith to the speck does not make the mountain move more. The power is not in the faith itself, as though faith were a force you generate in sufficient volume. The power is in the one the faith is connected to. Faith is not a substance you accumulate, it is a connection you make. And even the smallest, most trembling, most mustard seed-sized connection to an all-powerful God has access to all the power of that God, because the power was never yours and never depended on the impressiveness of your believing. This is unspeakably good news for everyone who has ever felt that their faith was too small, too weak, too full of doubt to count for anything. You have looked at your little flickering faith and compared it to the mighty faith of some hero of the spiritual life, and you have concluded that yours is too small to matter. Jesus says the opposite. He says, the smallest speck of real faith is already connected to infinite power, because the point was never the size of your faith, but the size of your God. Do not despise your mustard seed. Do not wait until your faith feels large and strong before you dare to bring it to God. Bring the speck, bring the flicker, Bring the trembling little faith you actually have, doubts and all, and connect it to the one who moves mountains. Because a speck connected to him is stronger than an ocean of confidence connected to nothing. The teaching about the workers in the vineyard, grace is not fair. Jesus told a story that offends our sense of justice so directly that many people, hearing it, quietly sighed against the master of the vineyard, which is precisely the discomfort the story was designed to produce. A landowner went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard, and he agreed with them on the standard daily wage. Then he went out again later and hired more, and again at midday and again in the afternoon. And finally, just an hour before quitting time, he hired a last group who had been standing idle all day. And when evening came, he paid them all, beginning with the last hired, the very same wage. The ones who had worked a single hour received a full day's pay, and so naturally the ones who had worked since dawn expected more. But they too received exactly what had been agreed, the standard daily wage, the same as everyone else. And they grumbled. They complained that it was not fair, that they had borne the burden of the whole day and the scorching heat, and yet they had been made equal to those who worked only an hour. And the master's reply is the heart of the teaching. "Friend," he said, "I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me on the wage? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to the last the same as I gave to you. Are you envious because I am generous? Or, as it is sometimes rendered, is your eye evil because I am good?" This teaching is almost never opened up honestly because it strikes directly at something in us that runs very deep. Our conviction that reward should be strictly proportional to effort, that we should get what we earn and others should get what they earn, and that if someone receives more than they deserve while we receive only what we were promised, an injustice has been done to us. And Jesus, through this story, dismantles that entire framework as it applies to the grace of God. Because grace, by its very nature, is not fair. Grace is not wages. Grace is not the proportional reward for services rendered. Grace is the outrageous generosity of a God who gives the full inheritance to the son who wasted it, the full day's wage to the worker who labored an hour, the full welcome to the thief on the cross who believed in his final breath. And the only people who are offended by this are the people who think they have earned their standing and are therefore owed more than the latecomers. Which is to say, the people who have not yet understood that no one earns the grace of God, that all of it, for all of us from the first hour to the last, is gift. If this teaching offends you, sit with the offense because the offense is diagnostic. It reveals the older brother still living in your heart, the worker who labored all day and resents the generosity shown to the one who came late. And the cure for that resentment is to remember that you, too, were shown a generosity you did not earn. The moment you truly grasp that your own place in the vineyard was never a wage but always a gift, the grumbling dies, and in its place comes something far better: joy that the master is generous, gladness that the latecomer was welcomed, relief that the whole thing was grace from the beginning. Because if it had been wages, none of us could ever have earned enough. Are you envious because he is generous? Or will you let his generosity toward others become the very thing that assures you of his generosity toward you? The teaching about the cost of following. Count it first. Here is a teaching that the marketing-minded, crowd-gathering instinct of institutional religion almost always suppresses, because it does the opposite of what marketing does. It does not lower the price to attract the maximum number. It states the price plainly and tells you to count it before you commit. Which of you, Jesus asked, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid the foundation and is not able to finish, everyone who sees it will mock him, saying, "This man began to build and was not able to finish." Jesus, astonishingly, seems to go out of his way at certain moments to make following him sound difficult rather than easy. When large crowds gathered around him, drawn by the miracles and the free bread and the excitement, he would often turn and say something that thinned the crowd rather than swelling it. He spoke of taking up a cross, an instrument of execution, and following him. He spoke of a devotion to him that had to exceed even the deepest natural loves. He told the eager that the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head, that following him meant a life without the guarantees of comfort and security that the world offers. He was not trying to gather the largest possible crowd of shallow admirers. He was calling for disciples who knew what they were signing up for and chose it anyway, with their eyes open. Why would he do this? Why tell people to count the cost when a smaller price and a softer pitch would have drawn so many more? Because Jesus was not interested in a large crowd of people who had signed up for something they did not understand and would abandon at the first difficulty. He was interested in real disciples, people whose commitment would hold when the cost came due, as it always eventually does. He knew that a faith entered lightly on the promise of only benefits and no cost would collapse the moment the cost appeared, like a tower abandoned half-built for lack of funds. And so, out of a deep honesty and a deeper love, he told people the truth up front. This will cost you. It will cost you your self-rule, your right to be your own master, your comfortable illusions, and possibly a great deal more. Count that cost. Look at it clearly, and then decide. But here is what the suppressors of this teaching always miss, and what makes it not a discouragement, but the highest possible invitation. Jesus tells you the cost is high, because what he is offering is worth it. You count the cost of a tower because the tower is worth building. He is not warning you away. He is inviting you into something so valuable that it deserves your whole life, and he respects you too much to trick you into it with a discount price and hidden terms. The pearl of great price costs everything the merchant has, and the merchant, in Jesus' telling, sells everything he owns to buy it, not with grief, but with joy, because he has seen what it is worth. The cost is real, but the treasure is real too, and it is worth infinitely more than the cost. Count the cost, yes, and then count the treasure. And you will find, as every true disciple has found, that the treasure was always worth more than everything it cost. The teaching about the yoke. That is easy. Come to me, all who are weary of all the invitations Jesus ever spoke. There is one that seems, on the surface, to have survived intact. It is quoted often, printed on wall hangings, offered as comfort at gravesides. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. But even this, one of the tenderest sentences ever spoken, is usually cut off before its most surprising and most important part. And in the cutting, its full meaning is lost. Because Jesus did not stop at the offer of rest. He went on, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now stop and notice something strange. He offers rest to the weary and burdened, and then, in the very next breath, he offers them a yoke. A yoke is the wooden harness laid across the shoulders of an animal to hitch it to work. It is, on the face of it, the very opposite of rest. You would expect him to say, "Come to me, you who are burdened, and I will take every burden away and leave your shoulders bare." Instead, he says, "Come to me, and I will give you a different yoke, mine. And you will find that this one is easy, and this burden is light, and it is here, under my yoke, that your soul will finally find its rest." What could he possibly mean? He means this: the weariness of the human soul does not come from having a yoke, it comes from having the wrong one. Every person is yoked to something, to the crushing demands of self-justification, to the endless labor of proving their worth, to the heavy harness of anxiety and fear, and the exhausting attempt to hold their whole world together by their own strength. These are the yokes that grind a person down, the burdens that leave the soul weary in a way that no sleep can cure. And Jesus does not offer to remove all yokes and leave you drifting, unhitched, purposeless. He offers to exchange your yoke for His, to take off the crushing harness of self-rule and self-justification, and to place on your shoulders instead the yoke of walking with Him, a yoke shaped by one who is gentle and humble in heart, who does not drive his animals cruelly, who walks beside you in the harness and pulls the greater share of the weight himself. Because that is the other secret of the ancient yoke that we so easily miss. A yoke was often built for two. It was a double harness, joining a younger, weaker animal to an older, stronger one, so that the stronger bore the load and the weaker simply walked alongside and learned the pace. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke," He is not sending you out to pull a heavy cart alone. He's inviting you to be harnessed beside Him, to fall into step with the one who carries the true weight, to learn His unhurried and gentle pace, and to discover that a burden shared with Him is a burden transformed. The yoke is easy not because there is no load, but because you are no longer pulling it by yourself. The rest He offers is not the rest of having nothing to carry. It is the rest of no longer carrying it alone. This is why the abbreviated version, which stops at "I will give you rest," misses so much. It leaves people imagining that the rest Jesus offers is the rest of escape, of having every burden lifted and every demand removed. But the rest He actually offers is deeper and stranger and better than that. It is rest in the midst of a life that still has a yoke, still has a calling, still has weight to bear. Rest that comes not from the absence of the load, but from the presence of the one who shares it. Come to Him then, exactly as weary and burdened as you actually are. Do not wait until you have sorted yourself out. Do not clean yourself up first. Come with the crushing yoke still on your shoulders, and let Him lift it off, and let Him place His own gentle yoke there instead. And walk from this day forward, harnessed beside the one who is humble in heart and who will pull the heaviest part of every load you will ever carry. That is the rest your soul was made for. And it has been on offer the whole time. Where does all of this leave you? We have now walked through a great many of the teachings that so rarely make it into the version most people receive. And if you have felt at various points along the way, both deeply comforted and deeply unsettled, then you have understood them rightly, because that is exactly what they are designed to do. The teaching of Jesus, in its fullness, is not a pillow, and it is not a whip. It is a physician's hands, sometimes soothing, sometimes probing the wound, but always in every touch, working toward your healing. And I want to gather up what we have seen and press it toward the place where it is meant to land, which is not your intellect but your actual life. Consider what we have uncovered, a kingdom that grows in the hidden and the small rather than the visible and the grand, which means you can stop straining to build what you were only ever meant to receive. A cure for anxiety that works by relocating your trust onto the proven character of a God who feeds the birds and clothes the fields, which means the antidote to your restlessness is not more effort, but deeper trust. An inverted ranking in which the last are first, which means every hidden and overlooked act of your life is seen and counted by the only one whose count endures. A command to love your enemies that breaks the chain of retaliation and sets you free from the prison of returned harm. A God who runs down the road toward the returning sinner, which means you never have to close the distance alone. A Sabbath, and indeed an entire faith made for your good rather than your burden. A love that flows most freely from the heart, most aware of how much it has been forgiven. A single throne in your heart that money and God cannot share. A widow's 2 coins, worth more than all the impressive gifts of the wealthy. A sobering call to make sure your faith is a matter of real relationship rather than mere religious performance. A narrow gate that asks you to set down everything that was weighing you down anyway. A morality relocated to the heart, where God offers not behavior management, but genuine transformation. A childlike dependence that turns out to be a homecoming rather than a demotion. A physician who came precisely for the sick who know they are sick. An unlimited forgiveness that flows naturally from a heart that has grasped its own vast pardon. A greatness measured by service, dramatized by the God who knelt with the basin and the towel. A seed that is always good, falling onto soil that can always be prepared. A neighbor who turns out to be anyone in need, and a circle of love that has no boundary. A king who has hidden himself in the least of these, so that no act of love toward the lowest is ever unseen. A hidden reward for the goodness done in secret before an audience of one. A vine whose life produces the fruit you were exhausting yourself trying to manufacture, so that your only task is to remain connected. A mustard seed of faith that is enough, because the power was never in the size of your believing, but in the size of your God. A grace that is not fair because it was never wages, but always gift. A cost worth counting because the treasure on the other side of it is worth infinitely more than everything it asks. And a yoke that turns out to be easy, not because the load is gone, but because you are no longer pulling it alone. That is a fuller portion. That is far more than 10. And even this is only a beginning. Because we said at the outset that he taught 100 things, and the point was never to exhaust the list, but to break the spell of the reduced version. To let you feel in your own chest how much larger and stranger and more demanding and more beautiful the real teaching of Jesus is than the manageable version so many of us were handed. Once you have felt that, you cannot unfeel it. Once you have stood inside even a few of these rooms, the doorstep can never again be mistaken for the house. And that is the gift I most wanted to give you today. Not merely a longer list, but a permanent restlessness with anything less than the whole, a holy dissatisfaction that will keep you searching the words of Jesus for the rest of your life, always suspecting, rightly, that there is more, because there always is. Here is what I most want you to carry with you as we come to the end. The reason these teachings were reduced was that they cost something, and the reason they are worth recovering is the very same, that they cost something. A faith that costs nothing changes nothing. The teachings that got left out are precisely the ones with the power to change you, because they are the ones that ask something of you. Your trust, your pride, your grip on your own life, your right to retaliate, your illusion of self-sufficiency, your throne. And everything they ask you to give up is something that was diminishing you anyway. Everything Jesus asks you to lay down is something that was already too heavy to carry. He does not take in order to leave you empty. He takes in order to make room. He empties your hands of what was killing you so that he can fill them with what will finally make you alive. That is the pattern of every one of these teachings, and it is the pattern of the cross itself, where the greatest loss became the greatest gift, where death itself was turned inside out and became the doorway to life. So do not be afraid of the fuller portion. Do not retreat to the doorstep, because the house is large, and some of its rooms are dark and demanding. The one who waits for you inside is the God who runs down the road, the physician who came for the sick, the master who kneels with the towel, the father who clothes the fields and feeds the birds and has not forgotten the least detail of your particular life. Every hard teaching leads in the end to him, and he is worth every cost. Before you go, let me ask one thing of you, and I ask it gently because of everything we have just shared together. If somewhere in this teaching a particular person came into your mind, a friend, a family member, someone carrying the exact weight that one of these teachings spoke to, someone who is standing on the doorstep and does not yet know there is a whole house, then send this to them. That is the one thing I would ask. Not because it helps a channel, but because it might be, for that one person, the word that reaches them at exactly the right moment, the way this may have reached you. You know who they are. You thought of them for a reason. Send it to them, with a simple note that you were thinking of them. Let it be a quiet act of love toward one soul who needs it. And if you have not yet subscribed, and you would like these teachings to keep finding their way to you, subscribing is free and takes only a single tap, a way of keeping your own seat here among everyone who is searching for the fuller portion together. And before we part, tell me one thing in the comments. Which line or which teaching in all of this did you most need to hear today? Name it so that it can be shared once more with the next person who scrolls past and needs exactly that. Your one honest sentence might be the thing that stops a stranger in their tracks. Now receive this blessing, spoken over you where you sit. May you no longer be content with the doorstep, now that you have seen the house. May the God whose kingdom grows in the hidden and the small grow something quiet and unshakable in you. May you have the courage to love your enemies and so be set free from the prison of every wound. May you know in the deepest place that when you turn toward home, he is already running toward you. May the log come out of your own eye and the mercy flow toward everyone else's. May you find your life by losing it, your greatness by serving, your fullness by opening your empty hands. And may the 100 things he taught, no longer reduced to 10, take root in the good soil of a heart made ready to receive them, and produce in you a harvest beyond anything that was ever sown. You are known, you are wanted, you are already being run toward. Go in that peace and let no one ever again sell you the doorstep as though it were the whole house.